Hello everybody, welcome back to the Platformer series. Today we're going to be taking a look at screen transitions. So that's how to move our player from one level that we build in one room to another level that we build in another room. How we're going to do this is we're going to create an invisible object that just exists in the background that's also persistent, which means that object still exists when we move between rooms. And what that object's going to do is it's basically going to receive commands from a script that we're going to write. So that whenever we call this script, we send a command to this object, and that object creates a black slide transition, and then when that transition completes, it sends us to a specific target that we decided when we called the command, and then plays a slide transition to bring us in to the next room. So before we get started, what I've gone ahead and done is, you might remember this level. This is the level we were working on before, but I've also made a second level. Okay, so I've made another room, exactly the same as the first, all the same stuff in it. It's got my camera object, it's got my player, it's got my gun, all that kind of, all the enemies and that kind of stuff, the walls and dirt. So go ahead and make sure you do that. The quickest way might just be to right click your first room and hit duplicate, and then you've got all your camera settings and everything are the same. And you just need to reposition your enemies and stuff like that. But go ahead and make sure you do that, okay? I've named mine R1 and R2. If you need to, just pause the video now, go ahead, make your second room. Done that? Okay, cool, let's move on. The whole reason we have a second room in the first place is so that we have somewhere to actually move to with our transition, right? The other thing we'll be able to use it for, we'll be able to use it to restart the game as well, so we'll be able to show you that. But we need somewhere to demonstrate that it definitely allows us to move between rooms, right? So what I've done is I've also left a little gap at the bottom here, end of room 1, which is where when we walk to here, we're going to place an object here that will detect if we've touched it. And if we have, it'll take control away from the player, play our transition, and move us to the next room. So the first thing I'm going to do is create our controller object for this, okay? So I'm going to right-click an object, hit create, I'm going to call this O, what am I going to call it? O transition. That's what I'm going to call it. I'm not going to set any sprite for this, as I said, it's going to be invisible, but make sure you tick persistent, okay? You can even untick visible if you like, doesn't really matter because there's no sprite. But tick persistent, which means that if we move between rooms, usually when you go from one room to the next, it destroys all objects in the current room and creates the new ones in the next room, right? But if we tick persistent on an object, it means any instances of that object will just carry on between rooms, okay? So make sure that this thing is ticked. So first of all, we're just going to do some setup in here. I'm going to press F12 and gives a bit more space to work with on this. I'm going to add the create event, and then I'm also going to maximize this just so that we've got a full screen view of our code. I'll make the text a little bit bigger for now. Okay, so a description at the top here, that's just going to be size, variables, and mode setup. Okay, because we need to grab some variables that determine our screen size. They're not really ever going to change for the sake of this game, so I'm just going to get them in the create event of the transition object, and then we don't need to keep getting them. And then you'll see what I mean with the mode setup in a second. So the first thing I want to do is type W equals display get GUI width. Okay, open bracket, close bracket, semicolon. Nothing in those brackets because it doesn't take any arguments. It's just a script that you can call by itself, but you do still need to include the brackets. What that does is it gets the width of our GUI. One way to think of the GUI is kind of a separate screen layer, which we can use to draw like our menus and buttons or anything static or anything that we want to draw on the screen that's not dependent on where the camera is pointing. So if you're drawing your lives in the top left of the screen and that kind of thing. Okay, which is basically what we're doing with our transition, right? We want to draw that over the screen wherever we are. So we're going to use the GUI for this and the draw GUI event, which we'll see us use a little bit later. But we need to get the width of that GUI, which is basically the width of our screen at any point in time. Okay, we could have also used like the camera width and stuff like that. But doing the GUI is going to be more consistent because that's the layer that we're going to actually use to draw our black rectangles over. Okay, that's how we're going to make our slide transition. We're going to draw some black rectangles and vary their size. The next thing I need is the height, so type H equals display get GUI height, as you might have guessed. Again, open bracket, close bracket, semicolon. And then the other thing I need is I need half of that value, okay? Because we're going to start our rectangles at the top and bottom of the screen, 2 rectangles, and then grow them vertically. Grow this one down, grow the top one down and the bottom one up until they reach the middle of the screen. So we need to know where the middle of the screen is, and we may as well get that now in the create event so we don't have to work it out again later. That's going to be h half. h underscore half equals, and then h, which we've already got, times 0.5. Okay, and that'll divide it by 2. Or you can, you might divide by 2 if you want. I tend to just write times 0.5 for that. So the next thing we're going to do is a bit new, and I'll explain it once I've written it, but we're going to declare what's called an enum. Okay, so I'm going to write enum, which you can see turns yellow and bold, trans underscore mode, which is going to stand for transition mode. Okay, open a curly bracket and close a curly bracket, and in the middle here, write the following. I'm going to use all caps because for constant type stuff I always use all caps. Off, next, go to, these all have commas on the end, that's important, other than the last one, restart, and intro. Okay, and you should see those probably when it updates in a second will turn red. Yep. So what on earth is this? Basically what an enum is good for, what I use them for, is for turning basically a set of ordered numbers into English readable words, mostly as a coding aid and a coding structure aid, okay? So all of these, by default, you can set them to equal things, so I could have said like off equal 5, and then from that point onwards, every time I type trans underscore mode dot off, basically what I've done is written 5 in the code, okay? So you might think, well, how is this different from just writing a variable? Well, these are very effective for situations where the number never changes, okay? You can't change an enum once it's actually been declared. They kind of work like constants in that regard, okay? That's just numbers that are always a certain thing, and are never actually changed or manipulated by anything else. If I don't set this to equal 5, these all get values by default. That shouldn't be a semicolon, sorry, that should be a comma. That should have been a comma anyway, actually, when I wrote equals 5. If I don't set anything here, they'll just be assigned a number. I think it'll work like this will be 0, this will be 1, this will be 2, this will be 3, and this will be 4. And if you're writing something like a state machine, or you're writing something with various different modes assigned to it, like, basically we're going to have a variable that's called mode, and that's going to decide what mode our transition is currently in, whether it's turned off, or whether it's going to the next room, or whether it's restarting, or whether it's currently in the introduction of a room, so like it's fading us into the room, and so on, okay? And I could just do this by saying mode equals 0, and just remembering with a comment or something, 0 equals off, 1 equals next, and so on, right? But that becomes kind of hard to read and hard to remember after a while, right? I might have to keep looking it up. Okay, what does mode 2 mean again? And so on. Whereas if I now write mode trans underscore mode dot intro, yeah, it's a bit more typing, but I don't actually have to remember what value this equals. I just know that it is a value, okay? And then we know it's a value that's different to these other ones, okay? We know it's a unique value. I think it'll be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 in actual fact, but the number 4 isn't relevant to us in any way, right? We don't do any maths with it or anything like that. We just need it to be unique to these other ones, so that we set it to something that, so that when we change mode, we know what mode we're in. We can check to see if mode equals transmode.intro. It's basically just a way of turning numbers into English readable words, just like variables can be, but this ensures that they're all unique from one another, and it's good and an efficient way of doing it when you've got numbers that never actually change. Okay? Okay, good. I hope that made sense. Enums can be tricky to explain, but as I say, they're just a useful thing for helping you code-wise, okay? They don't do things as such, they just make your code easier to structure in some ways, and easier to remember exactly what it's doing where, okay? Because when we say mode equals transmode intro, we know, okay, the mode, we're in intro mode, okay? We can read that more easily than reading mode equals 0 and be like, well, what does 0 mean? Which one of these does that mean? You know what I mean? Okay. The next variables we need to declare are percent. Percent is going to be between 0 and 1, depending on how complete the black bars should be of the transition at any time. So when it's 1, we assume that the whole screen is covered in black. And when it's 0, we assume that the bars have faded all the way to the bottom of the screen, okay? And basically how our step event is going to work is it's going to fade our percent between 0 and 1 with a kind of lerping, a bit of like animation easing as well, so we're not just going to add numbers to it, but we're going to kind of ease it so it goes really fast and then slows down to a halt, and goes fast and slows down to a halt, whichever way it's going. but that's how it's going to work. It's going to be between 1 and 0. And then the other variable is target. Okay, I'm going to say it to room for now, though that's kind of meaningless. What target is going to be is if we are, say, in the go-to mode, which means we are transitioning from this room to another room, we need to know what room we're transitioning to, okay? And that room is going to be held by this variable. And when we call a script that we're going to make a bit later, let's move this down so we can see all of this script at once. When we call a script later that we're going to write to make us move from one next room to the other, what we'll be doing is we'll be setting the mode that we want to be in, and we'll be setting the target room if we need one. Okay, we won't set it if we don't need one, because restart will just restart the game. Go to will just next rather will just send us to the next room, and so on and so forth. Okay, but if we want to specify a specific room, then we need to know exactly which one we're going to. Okay, so that's all of our setup done. Let's right click now, and I'm going to add open event step. Okay, so I'm going to add the step event to this one. The description for this, I'm just going to make progress the transition. Okay, because that's what we're going to do. So assuming that we are not in mode off, which means we're not doing anything at all, it means we're either in next, go to, restart, or intro, progress the percent value appropriately, okay? And then if percent is 1 or is 0, then we know we probably need to do something, okay? We need to either move to a new room or maybe turn our mode back to off. The very first thing we're going to do is check to see if our mode is not off. So if mode does not equal trans underscore mode dot off. Okay, open a curly bracket. And the next thing we want to do is if open bracket mode does equal trans mode dot intro. Okay, so if we are in intro mode, else open bracket close bracket. So in here, the intro mode means that we want to fade our bars back out. Okay, that means we've arrived in the room that we want to be in. Remember, this object is persistent, so that will carry across. We've arrived in the room that we want to be in. So what we're going to do is fade percent from 1 all the way to 0. Otherwise, fade our percent from 0 all the way to 1. Okay, how we're going to do that is a little complex, but you don't need to worry too much if you don't understand this. You can just, if you want to do something simple, you could just do something like percent equals max 0% plus equal percent plus 0.05, for example, is pretty simple, because obviously what that would do is return either the biggest number between either 0 or minus 0.5. So this would either move us slowly towards 0, or if we're below 0 or equal to 0, set us to 0, right? So it returns whichever is biggest. That's the easiest way, and that would create a very smooth transition, but like what that would do is it would always move at a constant speed. We're going to do something more complex than that, make it move fast initially and then slow down as it kind of reaches the bottom. And the same way as when when we're leaving a room, make it go fast, quickly close the bars in, but then like make the last few pixels take a little bit longer and slow down. Okay. So if you want an easy one, feel free to write that and write the opposite of that in here as well, which would be percent equal min 1% plus 0.05. Okay, if you want a much simpler one, feel free to write that. But we're now, instead of that, what we're going to do is write some more complex maths. Not really much more, just like another max line in here, just quite a few brackets involved to keep track of, really, that do things a little bit fancier, which I do recommend you doing. Don't worry too much if you don't understand how it works, but if you really want to, here's the easier way of doing it, so feel free to copy that now. Okay, good. Okay, let's do the next one. So let's get rid of those two lines. Let's write it in the way that actually has some easing behind it, okay? So percent equals max again, so 0 again, so still just returning the biggest value between 0 and a reduced version of percent, right, okay? To make sure we approach 0 but don't actually go over 0, under 0 rather. Percent, so itself, minus, just as before. Max again this time, and then open two pairs of brackets, percent divided by 10. or 0.005. Okay, and then close all the brackets that you've opened. Okay, so you close that pair and that pair, right? So what this is returning is it's either going to reduce our percent by 1/10 of percent. So if percent is 1, it will reduce it by 0.1. That's quite a big chunk. That's 10% of it. If it's 0.9, which it would be at that point, it will reduce it by 0.09, which is 10% of 0.9. So it reduces the amount it's reducing it by constantly. So it starts off fairly fast, like 1/10 of it in a frame, and then like less and less and less and less and less, okay? But we don't want that to continue forever, because if it does, then we'll never actually reach 0, or we'll only reach 0 after a really long time, because eventually it'll like have a rounding error and it'll be so small that it'll basically equal 0, right? But we want to be able to check later if it equals 0. So we want to make sure that we do actually reach this value. So we put a limit on how low it can go by saying that the smallest we can possibly move our percent value is 0.005, right? Okay, or like is that 0.5 of 1%? Yeah, 0.5 of a percent. At a time. Then we're going to do a very similar thing in the else statement. Okay, we're going to do percent equals min 1. So the highest we can ever get is 1 because it returns the smallest value. Percent plus max, open bracket, open bracket, open bracket. So we've got 3. 1 minus percent, close bracket. Okay, so this is one block. Divided by 10. Close bracket, okay, so that's another block, comma, 0.005 again. Close bracket, semicolon. So this is exactly the same, okay? The reason we do 1 minus percent here is because we want 10% of the distance that we've got left to go, which we got automatically from this, because if percent is 1, then we've got 1 to go, right? And if percent is 0.9, we've got 0.9 to go, right? And that's what we want the fraction of. But when we're going in the other direction, we're going from 0 to 1, 1 minus percent gives us the amount. Because if we're at 0.1, we've got 0.9 to go to get to 1, right? And the way we find that out is by subtracting percent from 1, and then divide that by 10. So that's what the extra bracketed section is for, to make sure we do that before we divide by 10. So that's all we actually need to do to make sure that percent moves in the direction that we want it to, okay? If percent now, at this point down here, if percent equals 0, then we know that we need to move from transmode intro back to transmode off, because we've finished our intro transition, okay, into the new room. But if percent equals 1, then it means we've fully covered the screen with black bars, and we need to actually move to the next room and set ourselves into intro mode to start getting rid of them again, okay? So how are we going to do that? I'm going to actually use something new here that we haven't used before, but first of all I need an if statement. I need to say if percent equals 1, or, that's 2 vertical lines, or the or statement if you really want. I just prefer the 2 vertical lines, or percent equals 0, so if it's either exactly 1 or exactly 0, switch mode. Okay, so what's a switch statement? Well, a switch statement is very similar to like a lot of if statements, because what I could do here is be like, oh, if mode equal trans mode dot intro, and then if mode equal trans mode dot next, and so on and so forth, and do the conditions afterwards. But that brings in a lot of problems between like, oh, what order do you do them in? How do you make sure that you've done one, don't do a different one, and so on? Whereas a switch sort of handles forking logic like this all at once and just make sure you only do the one thing that you want to do, okay? So how a switch works is if I open a couple of curly brackets for the switch, it returns whatever the result is of whatever expression you put in the brackets. Okay, so I've just put a mode in, so it's going to work out what mode equals, and then what we can do is we write a number of different cases. Okay, so I could write case trans mode dot intro, and then a colon on the end here. That's a colon, not a semicolon. Open another curly bracket. and close a curly bracket, and then on the bottom line of that, write break, semicolon, okay? Break is the thing that makes sure that the case ends properly, and we don't accidentally do some of the other cases and stuff as well. It just makes sure that we do the one thing. So under that, once I've written that case, so that case would go off if mode happened to equal transmode.intro. But if I just can copy and paste this, and have case for transmode next, for example, with a colon, okay, then we have a case for if mode happens to equal that, then do this instead. So it's kind of a multiple forked if statement as a fun way of thinking about it. Make sure you always include this break statement, otherwise you can run into weird problems with several cases going off at once and so on and so forth. Alright, I am going to include a case for each one of the different transmodes, so I'll put those in now, just so we can see how it looks. I'm going to make this a bit smaller so you can see it all at once. A bit bigger than that. Let's just scroll this down a little. Okay, so that's a bit better, so you can kind of see a bit clearer, because otherwise it can get a bit messy to look at. So let's just, we need about 5 of these, don't we? So let's get all those. Okay, so a case with the result, a colon, two open curly bracket, one pair of open curly brackets, and a break statement on the bottom line. Okay, and that's transmode intro, transmode next, transmode go to. It'll turn red to make sure you got the right word. Transmode restart. Oh, and then we don't actually need one for off, because we know already in this whole section, our very first thing was that we're not in mode off, so we don't actually need a 5th one. Okay, so we just need a 4th one. And then this is our switch statement, so this will do something based on whatever mode that we're currently in. Okay, if we are in the intro mode, then all we need to do is stop doing this stuff, right? Which means set ourselves back to mode off. So I can just say mode equal trans underscore mode dot off. Okay, and that leaves our percent at 0, just ready to start increasing it the next time we move room, but stops actually increasing or decreasing it anymore. Okay, because we just don't need to. If we're in trans mode next, it means we want to go to the next room. Okay, so the next room is always going to be the next room in our room order, in however they're ordered in the list in the IDE. Okay, so from room 1 it'll go to room 2. If you try and do if you try and go to the next room from the second room and there's no room under it, you'll get a crash. Okay, so you always have to make sure there is a room to go to next if you use this. Okay, so we'll set mode to equal trans. Let's go mode.intro. Okay, set us back to the mode where our black bars are unfolding again. And then room underscore go to underscore next. Okay, and that's the command I mean that will send us to the next room in order. Okay, go to will allow us to go to any room we want. So if we're in room 2, we can go back to room 1, or if we're in some theoretical, if there exists like a bunch of rooms, we can go to a specific one that we've chosen. Okay, and that's what our target variable will be used for. So again, we'll set mode to equal trans mode.intro, as that's what we'll need in the room that we go to next. Room go to open bracket target. Okay, room go to is a command that allows us to move to a specific room, whereas next, as I said, just takes you immediately to the next one. And then transmode restart will allow us to restart the whole game. Okay, so game underscore restart. Simple as that, because that'll end up destroying this object, and we'll have to actually make we'll set all our mode and stuff back to the defaults that are in our create event. Okay, so we don't need to worry about changing our mode or anything. For that one, we just do game restart there, and then that's everything in here. The last thing we need to do is just close our initial if statement with another curly bracket like that. Okay, that should get rid of the last little red error thing. We've got a complete set of code in our step event. Okay, the last thing we need to do, there is quite a lot of setup you'll have noticed in this particular episode before we can actually run the game and see any of this happening. I apologize for that, that's just sort of the nature of how we've done this one, but we will get there pretty soon. The next thing we're going to do is make it so we actually draw these black bars, because at the moment all we're doing is varying a number between 0 and 1. This would work still, like it would still send us to the rooms that we want to go to. Well, actually it wouldn't, because we've not written the script to actually set these modes and our target and everything yet. But still, all of this is functional in terms of moving us between rooms, but it's not functional in terms of actually drawing the blank bars on the screen for the transition. So that's what we're going to do now. So let's right click, add open event, draw GUI. Okay, and our description for this one is going to be draw black bars. Alright, it's going to be pretty simple. So if mode does not equal trans_mode dot off, because if it does, then we don't want to draw anything because we're not doing any kind of transition. So there's no point wasting rendering time actually going through this stuff. Even if we were to drawing like rectangles, zero height and 0 width, you know, like even though it's not drawing actually ends up resulting in drawing anything, it's a waste of processor time to actually call the command. So there's no point doing that if we don't need to. But if we do need to, draw set color C black. I should explain, by the way, I mentioned it earlier, but we're using draw GUI for this, which, as I said, draws things to the screen without having to worry about where the camera is, okay? It just draws on the screen of your window itself, okay? It doesn't worry about where in the room you are. So when you're drawing in draw GUI and you set a coordinate like x0, y0, that will always be the top left of the screen, not the top left of the room, okay? It's very, very useful. So draw set color black, draw rectangle 0, 0, as I say, the top left of the screen, and then W, which we know is the width of our GUI or width of our screen, which we set in the create event. Okay, let me zoom this in a bit, see a bit clearer because we don't have that much to write in this particular event. Comma percent. Okay, just so you can see what I'm actually doing here, because I've not really explained. We need the x coordinate and the y coordinate of the top left of the rectangle, which we've given it, top left of the screen, and then we want the x and y coordinate. By giving it another x and y coordinate, we can draw a rectangle, okay, between them. So the next x and y coordinate would be, the x would be the full width of the screen, so we go from the top left to the top right, and then in terms of our y coordinate, we go from the top, so 0, and then to wherever our percentage decides, we should be a percentage between 0 and half our screen height for the first rectangle, okay? So we get that by saying percent times h half, okay? Because h half equals half of our screen height, and percent is between 0 and 1. So 0 times this would be 0, which means drawing it right at the top. 1 times it would be like the full thing, so half the width of half the height of the screen, sorry. And 0.5 would be like a quarter of the height of the screen, okay? And then the last thing you write in here is whether or not this is just an outline or whether it's a filled rectangle. We want a filled rectangle, so I'm going to write false, semicolon, okay? Copy that. Actually, no, I'm not going to copy paste it, I'll write the whole thing again, because we want a second rectangle now that's at the bottom of the screen and drawing its way up from the bottom. Okay, so we're going to type 0 for the x, again, the left, but we want the bottom left this time, so it's 0h. Remember, h from our create event is the height of our screen, okay? So 0h, so right at the bottom of the window. The next x and y coordinate we want to be is going to be basically the far right, so width again, straightforward, and then the height is going to be between the very bottom of the screen, so h, and the middle of the screen, h half, okay? So it's going to be h minus percent times h half. Okay, so from the bottom of the screen minus the same value that we've got up here, which will bring us from the bottom at 0% to the middle of the screen at 1%. Okay, and then again, comma, false, bracket, semicolon. Okay, and that's it. That's everything we actually need in here. One thing I'll write in here just as a temporary thing so we can see it working when I do it is draw set color C white, which sets our drawing color to white. Draw text 50 and comma string percent. Okay, so we're just going to draw that percentage to the top left of the screen just so we can see it moving between 0 and 1 all the time. Again, 50-50 is kind of just moving as, it's like the top left plus 50 pixels right and plus 50 pixels down. Okay, so it's just sort of the top left-ish area of the screen. We're just going to draw this text on screen, which will just show us how far along it is just so we can see it working. We'll get rid of this command later. So it's all set up now, it's all finally set up, this object is ready. And we've actually done this in kind of a really long way. There are like faster ways I could have set this up, but what I've done here is set it up to be really quite flexible. So that we're going to write a script now that we can just call whenever we want to initialize one of these transitions and set it going, okay? Which is really useful, and then this object can just carry with us the whole game, and we don't have to make loads of different objects like transition in, transition out, transition restart, and all that kind of thing. We just have one, and we can just call commands that do all these different things for us. So hopefully it'll be worth it, even though it's been kind of a long setup getting everything we need together. Okay, so let's just make this stuff a bit smaller. I'm going to right click in scripts and hit create script. Okay, it's kind of come up in this code tab. That's fine. I'm going to call this script slide transition. Now I don't think we've ever used a script before. A script is a chunk of code very much like our events. So like a step event or like a create event, okay, we write a bunch of code in here. But when does that code happen? Well, that code happens whenever we call the script from inside another event. So now that I've created slide transition as a script, you'll notice if I go into, say, our step event, just randomly, at the bottom of here, if I type in slide transition, it turns yellow. Essentially what we've done is we've built our own command into GameMaker is one way of thinking about it, okay? That we can provide arguments to in brackets. We can get results out of it, like hello equals slide transition, stuff like that. You can do all sorts of great things with scripts. What we're going to do is set up a script that basically modifies OTransition's mode and target based on whatever instructions we give the script when we call it, okay? So I'm going to do a few special comments at the top here. / at desk, which is our common description one. I think I've been using at description until now, but you can also do at desk, which you'll notice I've done in some of the other ones, which is just a shorter way of writing it. Slide transition. I wrote slide description. Open bracket mode target room. Okay, I've just written that as the title for this just to show us exactly how this command is going to work. Okay, when we call it in our other events, we're going to write slide transition and then and then call the mode that we want to change to and the target room if we want to set one. We won't actually have to set one using this. You'll be able to just write the command like that, but if you write the command like that, it will also set a target room. Okay. Underneath this, I'm going to write another / and then at arg, okay? And basically what I'm going to use this for is to define, to autocomplete, to GameMaker's autocomplete, so you know when you type things like place meeting, open bracket, you'll see at the bottom here it tells you the different things you want to put in, like X, Y, and OBJ down here. By writing our own arguments at the top here, we basically decide what that shows at the bottom when we call this command, okay? So it really is like defining your own custom command. So arg mode, arg stands for argument, by the way, is the thing that you pass through with the script. So you type one word, and then you can type a little description on the end to remind you what it does. And this one's going to be sets transition mode between next, restart, and go to, okay? And then the next one is going to be at arg target, or target room, I guess, but whatever, sets target room when using the go to mode, okay, because that's the only one we actually need to pass a target room in with. So that means now, I think I can even call it from inside the script. I don't recommend actually doing that, but just to demonstrate, you need to now see at the bottom, slide transition come up with mode and target, okay? So now the IDE knows that we want those two arguments. You don't have to write that in, but it's very useful for yourself later when you're writing it, so you can remind yourself, like, okay, this is what my script needs to function. Okie doke. So what is the script actually going to do? It doesn't do anything at the moment. So what it's going to do is work with our transition object to change its mode and target. So with OTransition. Okay, I think we've used the with statement before, so we know that that just means that the object that we put in here is what's going to be affected by the following code. Okay. Open curly bracket mode equals argument. Open square bracket 0 close square bracket semicolon. okay? You can also write argument 0, and what both of these are currently referring to is the first argument that we pass through, okay? It has nothing to do with how we've defined it up here. That, again, as I say, is just for the sake of autocomplete. But for the script itself, like if I type it again down here, slide transition, and I pass through a bunch of things, like I write hello, goodbye, mode, target, whatever, right? If I did that, then I've passed through 4 arguments, okay? I've passed through hello, goodbye, mode, and target. Argument 0 would refer to the first one, so it would refer to hello in this case. Argument 1 would be goodbye, argument 2, mode, argument 3, target, okay? So this is how we get the arguments out of whatever we've passed through, okay? We type this green, argument 0, or argument whatever number, okay? By typing it in the square brackets, what that does is it allows us to have a optional number of arguments, okay? If you type argument 0 and argument 1 and stuff into things, then you'll find when you do slide transition, your code will expect 2 arguments, okay? So you actually absolutely have to provide 2 arguments. So I would have to provide mode and target, and if I tried to run the game with, say, mode just by itself, oops, and I included argument 1 in the script somewhere, it wouldn't let you do it, and it'd be like this command, this script expects 2 arguments, and you only gave it 1, okay? But by using the square brackets version, we can provide optional arguments. We just have to check to make sure certain arguments actually exist. We always want the first one in, so I'm not going to do any check to make sure that we have at least 1 argument in. But we might not always want to provide the second argument. We don't need to provide a target room if we're not using the go-to mode, okay? If we're restarting the game, we're restarting the game. If we're just next, then we just go to the next one in the room order, and so on, okay? We don't need to define a target room unless we're using the go-to mode. So what I can do is say if argument underscore count is greater than 1, argument count returns the number of arguments that we pass through. So again, in that situation where I wrote hello, goodbye, mode, and target, that would be 4. Okay, 4 arguments passed through, even though labeling wise it starts at the number 0, the count returns the total number. So if argument count is greater than 1, then we know we've passed through 2 arguments, right? Or we know we at least have a second argument. So we can say that target, again in O transition that we're modifying here, equals argument, open square bracket, 1, close square bracket, semicolon, and then close curly bracket. Okay, so now that we've done that, we can finally see this in action. Okay, we're going to see it in action very simply. Thanks to all the setup we've done, this is now actually really easy for us to use, okay? That's the main benefit of having done kind of all this work. We've done 4 different chunks of code, but they've ended up leaving us with something that's very, very easy to use now. So if I go to our player object, and when we have our key press R, which currently just restarts the game, what I'm going to do with this event instead, where I key press R, I don't know if I've ever actually included that in the tutorial where I did key press R or not. I included it so I make it easier to demonstrate things, but if for some reason I never covered that, then just go to add event, key press letters R to add this event, okay? And we're going to have this restart the game using our slide transition. So all we do is call the command slide transition. You can see it even came up there. Open bracket, and it tells at the bottom mode and target. Well, the mode that we want is trans underscore mode dot restart. Okay, and then we don't need a target room, so I'm just going to close it there and semicolon. Now you may have noticed I've used this trans mode restart enum outside of O transition. Okay, that's the other useful thing about using enums, okay, rather than like using a variable to name things. They're global in scope. I don't think I actually mentioned that at the time, which means I can call them from anywhere in my game once they've been defined once, okay? I don't even think it matters in terms of code order. Like, I don't think it matters if like some code, like if I ran this in a different room or whatever, and this code, I think it actually gets put in when it's compiled. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that, but I think it might work like that. But I always tend to just make sure they're in create events, okay? But as I say, they're global in scope, so I can refer to them from anywhere as always equaling these values, okay? So just by doing slide transition, trans mode restart, that should make our transition work now. So if I run the game, and I appear here, and I run around, and I can run over here just somewhere different, shoot some of these dudes, press R, and nothing happened. Which is embarrassingly because of a mistake I always make, which is I forgot to put O transition in the room in the first place. This is my most common mistake when using GameMaker by far, is I write a ton of code for something, I run the game, and it doesn't work, and I don't know why, and the reason is the code doesn't exist because I've never put it in the game room. So come to your first room, first of all. Go to, let's put it on the player layer, okay, and drag in O transition. It'll just be another one of these little question marks. Let's just pop it next to where the camera is so I can keep them all in one place. Okay, we only need it in one room, so just in whatever room you're loading first, okay? If you have an initialized room, that's even better. But let's run the game now. I'll try this again. Again, run somewhere else, just so that we're somewhere different. And press R. And so you've noticed that the awkward ending of that clip, it still didn't work. And why didn't it work? Because I've been even stupider still. Not only did I forget to put it in the room, but I also forgot that you actually have to have visible ticked here. I told you earlier, it doesn't matter, you could tick visible off if you wanted. It totally does matter, so I'm redacting that now, ignore that bit. Sorry for anyone who only watched half of this and for some reason thought that they could have visible unticked. Well, hey, serves you right for not watching the full video, right? Yeah, totally intentional. But if you don't have visible ticked, basically all your draw events get skipped. I totally forgot that was a thing. So make sure you have visible ticked, otherwise our black bars won't work. Okay, so now for the third time is a charm, run the game with visible ticked. You see the black bars came in there at the start. That should have thrown me in initially, right? And we didn't even have the white number in the corner, right? You see that white number in the corner, that's representing our percent of the transition, which is for debug. We put it in just so we can see it. When I press R now, you can see it climbs towards 1, and then when it gets to 1, the game restarts, and then we come back into the room. Okay, so as you see, right at the start of the game, the black bar is already there, and it brings us back in. One thing you'll notice is it goes right away, like that. The moment it hits the middle, it just instantly warps to the next one, which you might like. I think it looks okay. But you might want to think, well, maybe I want a little bit of a delay there, just like a little bit of a breather, just a slight pause where the screen is just black for a moment, okay, just as a pacing thing. One very quick kind of hacky way, but quick and simple way to do that is to just go into here, and where you set min to 1 here, what you can do is say you just change these ones to 1.2. So change 1 to 1.2 there, 1 to 1.2 there, and percent to equal 1.2 there. So it goes instead of going between 0 and 1, goes between 1.2, which means the black bars end up actually overlapping each other briefly. Like, you can't see it, but they go like 120% of the distance that they should. Which means it takes a little bit longer to get there, and we spend a little bit of time like fully black before actually fading out. You can even see the number going up and back to it, okay? Very, very simple sort of cheaty way of doing that. And hey, simple cheaty ways are great as long as they work and they don't screw up anything else, okay? So that's that. The other thing is, if you're going to play with that value or these values a lot, it's probably better not to write 1.2 and 1.2 and 1.2 in here, but to write like something like percent target or whatever, and use a variable and put that in place of all the 1.2s and set that up in your create event as something you can modify. So that you're not always modifying lots of different variables throughout your code, okay? It's generally not good practice to write in numbers like this, but I tend to do that in tutorials because I think it makes it clearer to you what's going on at the time, so you can see what numbers we're working with and you can understand them a bit better. But in reality, yeah, using things like 0.005 here and even just divide by 10 and so on and so forth, you should turn as many hard-coded numbers as you can into variables. It's always good practice generally. Don't have to do it with all of them, and everyone only does it to a certain degree, but do it as much as you can, and you'll find your code much easier to look after. Okay, so the last thing we're going to do now is make it so we can actually move between different rooms. Oh, I mean, we've already made it so we can move between 2 different rooms, but let's actually like create a situation in our room where that happens. Okay, so as I say, I have this area in the room down here that we're going to walk to, and when we stand here, we're going to move from this room to this room, okay? So how are we going to do that? Well, I'm going to make a new object, but first of all, I want a new sprite. Oh, I've actually already made it. Guess I set up this code before, but I'll delete that and we'll make it again. So let's right-click in Sprites, hit Create. And let's just call this S-Trigger. Okay, so we're just going to have a trigger area or something like that to set this off. Let's make it 64 by 64. Let's just fill it with just a obnoxious bright color like pink. Apologies for the screen right now. And let's just draw some text in white. Trigger area, okay? Let's make that like bold or whatever. Yeah, open sans is fine. Yeah, okay. This doesn't have to look great because this actually is going to be invisible, so don't worry about how kind of crummy this looks. It just has to be clear to us in the room editor what it is and what it's for. You can spend as long as you like making it look nice, but you're only really doing it for your own benefit, as your players are never going to see this, okay? So yeah, that'll do for me. Origin middle center is fine. It's really just a throwaway sprite. Now I'm going to right click in objects, hit create. I'm going to call this level end. Okay, that'll do. Set the sprite to be strigger. Add the event of a collision with the player. Okay. Description for this, I'm going to say is move to next room. Not with caps like that. And what I'm going to do is going to say with player if open and close square brackets. Let's big this up as well on F12. Okay, so this is when this object collides with the player. If has control, okay, which is a variable that we're going to put in the player that doesn't exist yet, that will allow us to switch player input controls on and off. Because if we started this transition, we don't want the player to still be running around and able to do things in the level. Or maybe you do, that's up to you and your game and how you're designing it. But we're going to make it so that we take the control away from the player before the transition finishes, okay? So we're preempting a little because we need to go in and actually add this to the player. But go ahead and put this in the code for your collision. So if the player has control, set has control, we open curly bracket, has control to equal false, semicolon, and then slide transition trans mode dot, we could use next or go to, since this is level end, I suppose it would make sense to just send us to the next level, so we'll just use next, and we won't set a target. In fact, we'll use go to, just so I can show you using the target. The name of the room we want to go to is R2, so I'll type R2 on the end there, okay? What you could do is set up a thing like this and say like target, and then set the target of this in the creation code of the object in the room editor, which I'll show you now actually. If I place this, yeah, we'll put it on the player layer, why not? And let's just resize it just to cover this kind of area here. And then double click that and hit creation code. You can give a specific instance, okay, and you can do this with enemies as well. Like if I double click on one of the enemies and go to creation code, you can give an instance creation code that's different from the other objects, and that's how you make things different from one another. And what I could do is I could say target equals and then specify a room, and then only this instance of this object would have that variable set, okay? It's a clever way of being able to make this without having to necessarily make a brand new object for like, level 1 end, level 2 end, level 3 end, and so on and so forth, right, okay? So let's do that. Let's go to room 1. So on the player layer, let's select this, double click, creation code, target equals R2, because that's the room we want to go to, right? And then let's come back to our collision event with O level end, pick this up, press F12, and as you say, we've got target set in here, okay? Which means our game will crash if a target isn't set, so you make sure you actually have that creation code actually set for each instance, otherwise your game won't compile, but it'll compile, it'll let you know. Well, it will compile, but it'll crash when you run into this. It'll show you the error, and it'll let you know. But make sure you do actually have that target set. You could set it to a default value if you wanted in create, but it's probably better just to leave it so that you get the crash, so that it will tell you what to actually set, right? But it'll basically set our transition mode to go to, and then the target room will be whatever we put in that instance creation code, which we put R2, okay? So that'll work, but we need to now go to our player object and actually set this has control variable up. So I'm going to middle click on O player, which will bring us to our player code. Go to step and maximize this. Select step. So this whole region, because we split this into regions before, but like our whole region here with get player input, I'm going to wrap this whole thing in an if has control. Okay, open bracket and close bracket right at the end here, just before we ended that region. Just on this whole section where we decide what key left, key right, key jump equals, okay, based on our gamepad and our keys and all that kind of stuff, okay? And then wrap an else at the end of here. So if we don't have control, just set all these to be 0 as default values, because they need to equal something, otherwise our commands later will get confused, or they might get stuck, like we might have been holding the right arrow key, and then we take control away from the player and it thinks the right key is still held because we never updated that. So we want to update them to be 0 if we don't have control. So key right equals 0, key left equals 0, and key jump equals 0. Okay, and then the very last thing we'll need to do is just go into our create event, which should be up here, and just write has control equals 0. Well, it shouldn't be 0, actually, it'd be true, even, because it's just a boolean, right? Which is the same thing we should have done with controller, really, rather than using 0 and 1. You should always use true and false where possible, really, but a bit late with that now. So by typing if has control here, it'll just say if it's true, does all that. If it's false, does all this. Okay? Simple stuff. So now that transition object is there and it's in the room, we should find now that if I run across into it, let's shoot these dudes on the way, 'cause why not? That's our game, right? And I walk into this trigger area. Oh, we get a crash because I made another mistake. Making a lot in this one. This is the mistake episode. But hey, it's fine, right? A lot of my episodes I tend to cut out and redo and re-record a lot of these mistakes. I've decided to leave a few of these ones in just because, hey, it's kind of funny. And also it shows you what it looks like when you make mistakes and reminds you that everyone makes mistakes. That's what I'm going with for being lazy and not removing all these mistakes in editing. Okay, so let's go to our level end object. So what happened there when I crashed? You might have noticed that bug came up. It said that it couldn't find target, and that's because we're withing the player at the moment. So it was looking for the target variable inside the player object, not inside this object. So we want to type other dot, okay? So it's going to return the target of the other instance, in other words, the instance that called the with statement, which is this instance, okay? So it'll get it right where it's actually supposed to. While we're here, we'll do what I forgot to do as well, which is turn visible on this off, actually have this one be invisible. Collisions will still work. You don't need visible tick to have a collision mask. And now this time, when we run it, if I run to the right, if we run into here, control gets removed from us, transition happens, we get moved to the next level. If I press R, it'll restart the whole game, bring us back to the first level again, okay? So there we have it. After a few mistakes and a bit of a bumpy ride, we have our transition system, okay? It's nice and smooth. You can see as well, I was just holding, you'll just have to trust me, I was holding D there, I was running to the right constantly. But you'll see the, like, I'll just show you again, like the control gets taken away from me because of the has control variable. So you can see it's very quick because the transition is quick, but yeah, I wasn't able to actually move around anymore. I could aim my gun still, I think, and still do that, but I wasn't too fussed about that. I just didn't want the player to be able to move around and jump and do stuff while our transition was happening. So that's the control that I took away. The only other thing I suppose I would suggest is getting rid of this number now. So let's go back to O transition and the draw GUI section, just where we had this draw set color white and draw text % there. Just get rid of that. And press F5. And as you can see, that number is now gone. So yeah, every single time that we actually want to move between two rooms, we get the smooth transition effect. All we need to do is call this command, call slide transition, just like I say from our key press R. It's literally one line. The mode that we want to use, so restart in this case, and the target if we have a target room that we want to go to, in the case of O, level end. Okay, simple as that. Hope you've enjoyed this one, despite a couple of the mistakes. I hope those mistakes were useful. I think it's worth leaving them in for once, because I never usually do. And I'll catch you guys on the next part 8, which will probably be in a couple of weeks, usually every other week. I know it was a bit of a gap since the last one, but that's because I had a huge video I was working on for my Patreon's supporters. Hopefully this time we'll get back into the once every other week. That's my plan. It won't always go to plan, but that's generally what I try to do with the series. I don't know how many parts it'll go. Well, I can't say ahead of time how many parts this is going to go on for. I know the goal it's going to reach is to have, which is what I showed kind of at the very beginning of the series, which is kind of like a complete platform with a menu, all these slide transitions and stuff like that. Also like drawing text to the screen, doing little text boxes and dialogue and stuff like that, just to kind of give you everything you need to do a full proper platformer game, okay? And teach you most of the skills you need to then build specific mechanics on top of that. That has always been my goal here. I know this one's ramped up a bit in terms of it's done quite a lot of fancy coding, but hopefully I'm hoping that I'm building you up with each part and you were able to handle this one okay. If not, you might just want to just go over it a couple of times, make sure you understood everything. Yeah, I hope you're getting a lot out of it, and I'll see you guys on the next part. Thanks for watching, guys. See you next time. The people on your screen now are the people that you have to thank for being able to see this video, as without their support on Patreon, I really wouldn't be able to make this stuff. Big shout out in particular, and in no particular order, to Dan, Inner Mule, Alex Ray, Giles Montgomery, Angel Rodriguez, Harold Guidry, Nathaniel Walsh, Louis R. Pereira, Stephen Hagen, Jason McMillan, Owen Morgan, Bowser the Dog, and John Grimshaw. Thank you very much for your support. If I'm going to be making videos like this full time, I do still need more support on Patreon. I would love to be able to do this work with no ads and just be able to make free, great content for everybody. But for that, I need your support on Patreon to make it happen. So please, if you like the work that I do and think more of it should exist, consider dropping me $1 or $2 a month over there. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time.